And we are live on YouTube.
Good morning. This is the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee on June. That's wishful thinking. April, what day was it? 23rd. And we are without a few of our fearless leaders this morning, but expect them to join us virtually and hopefully in person later on today. We are first take up testimony on H-121 and hear from Paul Goodman, and see he's with us. We will start by introducing ourselves as we do, and then we'll ask folks around the room to introduce themselves. I am Representative Laura Sibilia, representing the Wyndham 2 District.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Claire Buckley, Leonine Public Affairs, here for CTIA, the Wireless Association.
Matt Soto, Meadow Hill, here with the CUDs. Andrew Brewer with Downs, Ragland, and Martin on behalf of Consolidated.
Okay, good morning and welcome, Mr. Goodman.
Thank you. My name is Paul Goodman. I'm legal counsel at an organization called the Center for Accessible Technology, located in Berkeley, California. We're a California-based nonprofit that focuses on access to computers and technology for people with disabilities. Prior to that, I worked at an organization called the Green Lining Institute, which worked on broadband access for people of color in low-income communities. I have about 14 years of experience working extensively on telecommunications and antitrust issues before both the California Public Utilities Commission and the Federal Communications Commission, including issues of state and federal jurisdiction, public purpose programs, including Lifeline program, digital equity, service quality, state and federal broadband infrastructure funding, disaster relief and response, and public safety. I will say that my statement of qualifications is attached to my written testimony. Perhaps I'll stop there since that's my introduction portion and see if there are any questions before I move on.
I think that's great. And please proceed.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today to be able to provide my input about H-121. It's my understanding the statute contains language similar to New York's Broadband Act and requires that broadband providers across the state offer plans for qualifying low-income households to receive broadband service at 25 megabits per second download speeds for $15 and $20 for 200 megabits per second download. I did want to note the California legislature is currently considering similar legislation, which would require internet service providers to offer broadband service of at least 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up for no more than $15 a month. And as a member of the California Alliance for Digital Equity, C4AT, that's short for Center for Accessible Technology, supports AB 53, and we've been engaging with policymakers to provide our recommendations, and hopefully some of our experience in that process will be helpful to you here. Earlier this year, the Public Advocates Office of the California Public Utilities Commission issued a report. I'll talk about the report in a moment, but I think our Public Advocates Office is sometimes a little unusual for folks. The Public Advocates Office is actually a branch of the Public Utilities Commission, but it is an independent branch. So it advocates on behalf of consumers and sort of operates in a silo away from the rest of the commission. So they are consumer focused and consumer advocates, just like my organization is. This report looked at the financial impact of adopting a $15 cap at current FCC broadband standard of the federal poverty line. It should be noted that one of the benefits of the Public Advocates Office doing this research is that the Public Advocates Office, as a branch of the CPUC, has access to confidential internet service provider data, which sort of ordinary members of the public or organizations like C4AT do not. So they have very, very solid numbers those reports are based on. Unfortunately, to preserve that confidentiality, the report discusses findings in the aggregate rather than discussing individual providers, but that's sort of a limit of the confidentiality requirement. The report uses the same methodology that a group called the Brattle Group used to assess the Federal Affordable Connectivity Program. And so is a pretty solid piece of methodology. And while the preliminary report is based on California data and is uniquely applicable to California, it does provide some insight into broader trends policymakers should consider when crafting their own broadband affordability solutions. Just a little background about California's broadband ecosystem. We have basically 4 very large broadband providers, which consist of 1 incumbent telephone provider, that's AT&T, and 3 cable companies, Comcast, Cox, and Charter Spectrum. The report's analysis of those 4 companies determines that if we required those companies to offer a $15 per month plan for low-income households, California residents could receive nearly $100 million per year in savings. Additionally, there are significant downstream savings. The reports looked specifically about savings generated by access to telehealth. So instead of having to take an entire afternoon off and arrange transportation and go to the doctor's office, telehealth will save those families a lot of money. And while they didn't expressly look at, say, remote work or remote education, we would expect to see the same kind of savings. The report didn't just look at affordability for consumers or financial benefits for consumers. It also looked at financial impacts on broadband providers, because I know that's a concern for some broadband providers. And the report found that a $15 low-income broadband requirement would potentially reduce the combined revenues of the 4 largest broadband providers by less than 1%. And this is primarily because of economies of scale, because how large these companies are, and also the windfall profits they receive from the super competitive prices they charge for their higher tiers of service for middle or upper income residents. Those the profits on those packages are very, very high, and therefore they have a lot of sort of financial wiggle room to offer low-cost service. Currently, the big 4 providers charge low-income customers in California a weighted average of $30 per month for broadbands, but it's at speeds at or below the Federal Communications Commission's current standard. And in fact, low-income subscribers in California are willing to pay more for higher tier services, even through their financial constraints. I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I do want to talk about, like, even in that situation, the cost of providing sort of those less expensive offerings, the revenue impact is limited because most of providers' revenue is not generated by low-income customers. One of the most popular price offerings in California is 1 gigabit download speeds. That usually costs about $85 to $99. And the total revenue that providers collect for those gigabit packages alone, without any of their other service offerings, are 30 times greater than the total costs they'd incur from a $15 low income requirement. So with all of that background in mind, I apologize for the length. I have the following 3 suggestions for your consideration regarding pricing and affordability, service quality, and program viability. First, as I'm sure you recall, I've talked about the 4 largest providers quite a bit. That's important for a few reasons. The first one is that internet service providers' pricing arguably has the most significant impact on that provider's financial ability to offer a low-cost product to low-income customers. There's another piece of this equation, which is the size of the provider. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But California's four large internet service providers have a very high average revenue per user and generally operate in a duopoly structure. So there will be one telephone company and one cable company that provides service. AT&T covers 75% of the state, while the three cable providers, with extremely limited exceptions, each operate in their own portions of the state. I think it's fair to say that cable companies have sort of carved up territories, and while I don't think there's been an explicit agreement, there's a tacit agreement that they will not move into each other's service territory, which reduces competition, unfortunately. This has led to increasing prices that consumers pay, nearing $100 a month. That includes fees, costs, equipment rental, that sort of thing. And we're seeing these prices stay relatively flat despite declining operating costs to providers. For cable companies and for telephone companies, especially for more established companies, they have built out their infrastructure and paid off the cost of that infrastructure years ago. So really now, most of their costs are maintenance, marketing, that sort of thing, customer service, that sort of thing. They're not in a situation where they're going, oh, we have to go out and build more infrastructure. These high prices effectively offset the impact on revenues if you add a price cap to $15 service to a smaller population like low-income users. So one way to frame it is that a $15 price cap addresses one factor that stems from what you characterize as an absence of competition or a level of competition that's insufficient to make broadband affordable to low-income households. One last thing about affordability is, in California at least, we've found that even at $15 a month, many low-income residents still can't afford broadband. For them, it needs to be at no cost to the customer, or they just can't afford it. That's supported by findings by both the California Public Utilities Commission and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And so I would encourage the committee to think about pairing an affordable broadband product with subsidies for like the most impoverished households. In fact, it's possible that subsidies could help offset any possible revenue loss from our big four providers, because it would increase adoption by new low-income customers. These providers, their low-cost offerings still generate a profit for them, so they'd have more customers. And while they wouldn't be getting the revenue that, say, a wealthier premium service subscriber might get, there is still revenue coming in. Second, and this is a lesson California has learned bitterly over the years, service quality is really just as important as affordability. In California, about 2 million low-income households subscribe to broadband, but less than half of those households subscribe to sort of the low-income programs or the lower-cost programs. This is because a lot of providers' low-income offerings, for instance, like Comcast Internet Essentials or Connect by T-Mobile, they offer speeds and service quality and data caps. They're just not sufficient. They might arguably sufficient for a single person using that service, but when you're talking about a household that has multiple occupants, it's just not enough, particularly given post-pandemic, the increased reliance on telecommuting, remote education, telemedicine. Additionally, while the ACP funding was still available, we saw a lot of industry upselling of service. Convincing customers that, oh, this service isn't quite good enough, which was likely true. Therefore, you should pay for a more expensive package just because their low-tier offerings were insufficient. So right now, as a result, a majority of low-income households in California pay more for better tiers of service because the purportedly low-cost offerings are insufficient. And I would say if you aren't getting the speeds and service quality and amount of data you need, that's not an affordable service for you. That's throwing away. And then just very quickly, I suggest the commission consider modifying the initial minimum service standards to increase the minimum download speed to 100 megabits per second and add a minimum upload speed of 20 megabits per second. New York's law was passed when the Federal Communications Commission federal standard was 25 download speeds and 3 megabit per second upload speeds. But since then, the FCC has updated that standard. We've looked at the applications and services people actually use, and they concluded that a household requires at least 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up. While not all providers may be able to deliver the current upload speeds on a consistent basis, that's a problem that's going to resolve as infrastructure continues to improve. And I think starting with a higher initial floor, coupled with the process to raise standards in the future, is key to ensure that low-income users continue to receive value from their benefit. We've seen in California that if customers get a low-income household gets a broadband service that's not fast enough or not reliable enough, you haven't just lost them as a customer for that service, you've lost them as a customer for a very, very long time because they don't trust the product. Finally, the size of the low-income population in proportion to an internet service provider's overall subscriber base is relevant. So the higher percentage of providers' customers that are low income, the larger their provider's revenue loss becomes. That's one of the reasons we're focusing on the 4 largest ISPs in California. They each have more than 500,000 customers, some substantially so, some in the multiple millions. And low-income subscribers make up a fraction of their total population of customers. So since you're looking at a small number of low-income customers and a large number of total customers, it's very easy to offset the cost of serving those low-income customers. However, we acknowledge that in California, we have a lot of much smaller broadband providers. And because incumbent providers have come into the state and decided to offer service in the most lucrative areas of the state, smaller broadband providers often come in, and the way that they survive is by going to unserved areas, which tend to be not low income, but have lower incomes than the more lucrative areas and tend to have a higher percentage of low income households. And that can create a problem if you're requiring them to say offer $15 broadband to everyone in the area, because if 50% of their customers are low income and the other 50% are not, their revenue from those higher income customers may not be enough to offset the cost to low income customers. Accordingly, H121's provision that broadband providers that serve 20,000 households or fewer can be exempted from the law if they can show an unreasonable or unsustainable financial impact is an important tool for ensuring smaller providers' financial viability and promoting competition. And as I mentioned before, one way to ease the burden on those smaller providers is considering a subsidy for that service. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Great. I have a question. Going back, just want to make sure I understand correctly. In California, there are no cable franchises. Is that right?
We do, but they tend to be statewide. It's a complicated question because we have what's called the DIVCA, the Digital Infrastructure Video Competition Act, which shifted franchises from local to statewide. So, but they're really not regulated very much. So they're often sort of considered outside of the equation.
And you don't have cable companies going head to head in California?
Except in a very few, very small areas. And we're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of people. They've really sort of carved up the territory.
Okay. And then I also wanted to ask about the healthcare savings. If you could just talk a little bit about like what goes into those calculations, like how we would measure that or project that.
Yeah, if you give me just a moment to check my notes, I believe I may have some numbers. It appears I don't have that at my fingertips, but I'd be happy to follow up and share that.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for submitting your testimony in advance. Are there other questions? Yes.
Yeah, can you, would you tell me what the broadband coverage is in the state of California?
Yeah, I can give you a rough idea. I believe, let me find this document because I may be able to answer to both of those questions if you'll bear with me for just a moment.
Certainly can.
Well, here we go. So let me answer the telehealth question first, I guess. So yes, the study found that telehealth visits as opposed to in-person visits save patients on average between $174 and $219 and saves providers roughly $2,211. And there are similar studies that found the same thing. Like the savings for consumers come from avoiding transit costs and losing hours at work. To move on. The question about
Mr. Goodman, so that was 2,000 per visit? The providers?
Yes. And in full disclosure, this is the Public Advocate's Office report. And so that's based on their data. So I'm not here to say that's absolutely correct. I'll also note we're in California where the cost of living is sometimes extreme. So those numbers may not be as high elsewhere. So
Yeah, it would be great if you'd be willing to send along that report if that's something that's shareable. And then
absolutely. Yeah.
Mr. Bailey's or Representative Bailey's question.
It's sometimes difficult to say. I believe the most recent numbers I've seen said that 78% of Californians have access to broadband, but the way the broadband's defined for those Californians is that's at or above the federal minimum standard of 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up. We do have other Californians who are using like dial-up or DSL even to this day that are far below the standards and therefore not considered broadband. So I think industry claims are often, we provide internet service to 95% of Californians, but some of that is just below the standard.
Yes. Yes.
And just one other question, do you have any idea how much is done by Starlink?
No, in California, at least for now, we don't really consider satellite internet as part of high-speed internet because it doesn't meet the minimum standards. Also, I think that probably right now that information is not publicly available, and it's usually about a couple of years before that data comes out. But I will make sure to double check and let you know if we have hard data on that.
Yes.
So during your testimony, you mentioned subsidies. Does California currently subsidize, and if so, how do they fund that?
I'm chuckling because has been something I've been arguing about since 2012. So I think, we have companies that get the federal lifeline subsidy. And then there's a California lifeline subsidy, which is, I think, $16.25. The federal subsidy is $9.25. So it's a pretty substantial subsidy. And most people use that for wireless service. And therefore, since they're buying a wireless product, they're getting both broadband access and telephone service sort of as a bundle. We've had much less success when it's come to home internet. The ACP, the American Connectivity Program, really helped. We got a lot of folks signed up for that, but when funding expired, we lost a lot of those subscribers, which is unfortunate. And we don't really have a fixed broadband provider right now that's participating in, say, Lifeline. There is a bill currently in the California legislature that would provide a subsidy. I believe right now, the way it's written, it would be a $20 subsidy with a cost to the consumer of no more than $10 a month. That's working its way through the legislature right now.
But that's just lifeline subsidy. That doesn't include just regular internet subsidy.
No, I'm sorry. So the lifeline subsidy just covers phone service, and then this new bill would add a $20 subsidy for broadband service.
And how would that be funded?
That would be funded just like the Lifeline program is. It's through a surcharge. It'd be part of the universal service surcharge you see on your phone bill.
So that would be transferred to all other ratepayers.
And this is a big point of contention. Right now, at least for the first 5 years, because of the intricacies of federal and California law, it appears that you can't impose a subsidy for universal service programs on broadband providers. So you can, the way in California our subsidy program works, it's based on how many lines communication lines you have in your house. So it's really based on telephone. So yes, that would be telephone ratepayers, but the vast majority of those are bundled with broadband service. But right now, that's a real puzzle we're trying to figure out because we have a lot of industry resistance and a lot, I think, of strong legal arguments that we couldn't just say to broadband providers, your customers are going to pay a subsidy to pay a low-cost broadband. There have been discussions of using the general fund to do that, but that funding can be so up and down. We're a little hesitant to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Morrow, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Can you say a little bit more about the new FCC guidelines of 120? Is that, I mean, what's the effect on policy around the country when they update their guidelines like that? Is there anything mandated, or it's strictly a guideline?
So it usually begins as sort of a guideline, and then there's a little bit of a phase-in period where you most often see it is like no one can really require a broadband provider. I don't think I've ever seen anyone go out and say you have to improve your broadband speeds. So it's really more of a carrot than a stick. So eventually the FCC will say, well, you can't get federal lifeline funds unless you're offering service at these speeds, or say BEAD funding or the federal funding account or even state funding in California will often say we will subsidize a broadband build out project, but it has to offer these minimum speeds. And even in those cases, there are exceptions where if a provider can say, well, given our current infrastructure, or given that we're going to a remote area with not a lot of people in it, it's not financially viable for us to build infrastructure that robust. Therefore, we'd like a waiver so we can offer speeds that are a little bit slower, but still enough for the community.
And that's on the FCC's website, their analysis of this.
Yes, I'm also, let me make a note of that.
You could just send a link. That would be great.
Okay. Yep. Representative Vail.
Thank you. Do your current providers provide any volunteering a lower income package on their?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I think I didn't let you finish. So.
No, I was just wondering if your providers are providing a low income package on their own.
Yes, they do. Most of that is as a result of, say, merger conditions or other applications they've made. And those, to be clear, those conditions have expired. And to the provider's credit, they have continued offering those services. There's some limitations, though, and I'll talk about Comcast Internet Essentials is the one I'm most familiar with. So I mentioned earlier, those tend to be at speeds that are sufficient maybe for an individual, but insufficient for a family where you have two kids doing homework, or you have someone working, or talking to their grandma, whatever it is. So the speeds are generally not very good. The equipment folks get for that is often refurbished or a few generations out of date. And often the eligibility requirements can be a bit onerous. Like I know at least one of the companies, it's like you have, it was Comcast. They said, well, the requirement is that you have at least one child in the National School Lunch Program. But when someone signed up, they'd say, okay, who's your oldest child in the National School Lunch Program? And they'd enroll based on that. And as soon as that kid turned 18, they'd cut service off, even though there were other children in there. So, and they can make the process for signing up rather onerous. And honestly, we don't have it, I think, any quantitative evidence, but we have a ton of qualitative and anecdotal evidence that people are just saying the service is terrible. We had it for 3 months. It wasn't worth it. So we got rid of it. Or also a lot of people saying, well, yeah, I called to sign up for that, but they talked me from a $15 product up to a $60 product, which was $80 or $85 with fees. And after 2 months, we couldn't pay for it. And now we got referred to debt collection. So they are helpful programs, but not a cure-all.
Representative Tory.
I have a question about the providers' operating expenses. You mentioned trends and profits that have gotten bigger. Is that something that you have in a report that you're referring to, or what?
I will. So this is from an analysis, gosh, back in, I want to say 2018 that I did at my old organization. I can definitely dig it up and find it for you. But basically took a look at the cost of providing service and the cost of service in California, and then compared it to places like Chattanooga, where they have a municipal broadband network, other similar places, looked at Europe, looked all over, and figured out that the average non-United States cost for equivalent broadband was about $40. The cost in the US was about $80 for what was essentially the same service. So yes, I'd be happy to find that down. I would expect now that providers have paid off even more of their infrastructure, that may be an even larger gap. But from what we saw, they were making $40 profit free and clear.
Great, thank you.
Representative Warren.
Just to clarify, when you say infrastructure, you're talking fiber?
For a lot of the telephone companies now, they are increasingly moving to fiber. With cable companies, that's a big push. And one of the reasons you see this fight to keep upload speeds out of the equation is because they claim they can't, on their current infrastructure, which is coaxial cable, provide 20 megabit per second download speeds. As we transition to fiber, yeah, that will be less and less of a problem. And the great thing about fiber, I think, is a huge amount of capacity. You no longer have to worry about data caps because it's not like people can congest the network they can with, say, an old cable system. So yes, one of the one of the issues we're really dealing with is how to make that transition to fiber, because fiber is very future proof, and it's really what we need across the state. California is pushing very, very hard to do that, but also acknowledging that broadband build-outs take some time, and that providers don't want to see what we call stranded assets. They don't want to have equipment out in the field that we say, well, you still haven't used up the useful life of those assets, but we're making you put fiber in there. So when I talk about current deployment, it's some fiber, but for cable companies particularly, it's mostly coaxial cable.
Question about wireless internet. There's some areas that the country that have these wireless internet. You need line of sight from a tower, I guess, for them to work. You know, in New York, AT&T pulled out of New York and their wireless internet division based on this law. Is this a prevalent technology in California?
It is, I would say, an up and coming technology in California. I'll actually note that while AT&T said they were pulling out of New York because of this law, they only had about 5% of the market in New York, and it appears they had plans to pull out before that happened. That just gave them sort of a clear reason to do it. California is kind of a challenge because we have a bunch of different zones in California. You know, have these densely populated urban areas like San Diego and San Francisco and Los Angeles. Those have challenges because when you have a lot of tall buildings, wireless signals, it's harder for them to get through. And even now in urban and suburban areas, we have areas where there's not good cell coverage. Then you have Central California, which is a lot of long, flat, boring drives in between communities like Bakersfield and Fresno, which are pretty well populated. Then there's the Inland Empire, which is east of Los Angeles, which is sort of much the same. And then the real trouble spot is north of San Francisco. Well, I sort of call far northern California. It's hilly. There's a ton of trees. Towns and cities are really far apart. They're small populations, so you come up with a number of problems. So with a wireless signal, fog or trees or living in a valley or all that can affect the quality of the wireless signal. So it is presents some real challenges. One of the real fights we've had in California is that under federal law, states cannot tell wireless providers where to build out their networks. And arguably, oh, you have to increase so we couldn't say to someone, hey, you say you're offering service here. This customer isn't getting a strong enough wireless signal. You have to improve your network to make the signal work so it works for them. So wireless internet is great in theory, but in a lot of real world applications, we see it not delivering the kind of speeds that meet minimum standards. And so I know I've been saying this for a few years. I'm hoping one day I won't have to. I don't think we're quite there yet on wireless fixed broadband, but I think technology is always evolving. So it is something we should keep an eye on.
Other questions? Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Goodman. And we appreciate you sending your testimony and any follow-up materials to Jeff.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have our next witness at 11, and we will close live and come back then.